IDEs should sound familiar to you. We learned about them very early on in the class, and you've been using them the whole semester, even if you may not have realized it. An IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. And the way to think about an IDE is just like a document editor. Just like you have Google Docs and Microsoft Word for writing essays, IDEs are there to make it easier for you to write your code. Now in this class, we originally started off using the Mimir IDE because it was built in. It had a nice button that would make it really easy to submit your assignments. But as the semester went on, we started using Replit more and more, especially as the Mimir IDE had certain availability issues. There's a whole bunch of these IDEs out there, but the features that you might have noticed that are handy are code autocomplete, which actually in Python isn't that good. You probably haven't been using it much. And by the way, what is autocomplete? Well, it means as you're typing out a particular command or something that you're trying to type out in your code, like a print statement, you could just type PR and then maybe hit tab and then enter, and it'll give you prints, open close parentheses, and let you type the thing you want to print. There are some technical reasons why Python is harder to do autocomplete for, but you'll find that for other languages that are typed languages, and you'll find out what that means in future semesters, autocomplete can make it much, much easier for you to write your code. Another very handy thing is auto formatting, where the IDE that you use can handle indenting the right number of spaces for you when you hit enter, or breaking lines if a line gets too long into 2 lines, or commenting and uncommenting a block of code, which you have seen me do a lot in our videos, where I select the whole block of code and I hit Command/ on my keyboard, and that just comments the whole thing. And if I hit it again, it uncomments the whole thing. Syntax highlighting is very important. It makes it much easier for you to read the code that you're looking at. The version control that we just learned about, Git and GitHub, oftentimes these IDEs have built-in support for that. A code debugger is another thing I mention here. I will mention it even though you haven't used it yet. You will absolutely start using a debugger in future semesters. As your code starts getting more and more complex, and especially as you start to use other languages that have more, they do less for you, so you have to manually do more stuff and you can make more mistakes. A code debugger lets you step through line by line what happens in your code. And the closest thing we've seen to that is Python Tutor, where it shows you a diagram of what's going on in your code. But some IDEs actually have something like that built in directly, where you can step through line by line in your actual code while it's running. Very handy, very similar to Python Tutor. Many other tools that you'll find useful and understand the usefulness of later on as you learn to do more programming. Now, oops, there we go. What IDE should you use? I mentioned that there's lots of them. Probably not the Mimir IDE. That one's not great. We were using it because it's convenient for our class. It really depends on what kind of development you're doing. So for example, for iOS app development, if you want to build an iOS app, your only option is to use Xcode. Actually, Apple has it so that you can only really do iOS development using Xcode, which is Apple's IDE. If you're doing Android app development, there is an IDE called Android Studio. So we'll open a new tab, and it just provides all these handy tools specifically for doing Android work. So on the right, it'll show you a preview of what your screen will look like as you code on the left. As your app is running, it'll run in an emulator. And an emulator is something that emulates a phone. So it will show you, okay, how much memory and how much processor power is my app using in the emulator. And it has all sorts of other handy functionality that just makes it easy to develop apps for Android. These two here, Python development and C++ development, these are two IDEs that are specifically made for Python. PyCharm is for Python, and CLine is for C++. But these aren't canonical answers. Like, different people use different things. And in fact, there's a trend going on right now. In the past, people used to use, PyCharm for Python development. There was something called Eclipse for Java development, CLine for C++ development. Now, the trend that I'm seeing is that everyone is starting to use general development IDEs like Visual Studio Code, VS Code, or Atom, and then they add these little plugins that provide features specifically for your language. And so this is the one that I'm seeing especially most common, and that maybe if you talk to your friends at Howard or some of your TAs, they'll tell you that this is what they're using. This is also what is the industry standard now. And so it seems like Facebook and Google and Microsoft have all agreed. They're all going to start using this. Like, this is probably what you'll use if you come and do an internship at a big tech company. And also at startups. Lots of startups use Visual Studio Code because it has really great plugin support, which means that for whatever thing that you're trying to do, there's probably a plugin that'll help you do it. Provide tools that make it easier to do whatever you want to do. And so my advice for you is, unless you have a specific particular thing that you know you want to use a different IDE for, if you're just getting started and you're going to be taking your future CS classes, download and start using VS Code. That is, like, this is the IDE that is most useful in industry and just is really good to get used to. Get used to the keyboard shortcuts, get used to how to use it, what the different buttons do. In this class, we would use this IDE if we had more time to actually spend a week or so setting it up and me teaching you how to use it. We just didn't have time for me to do that. And so we defaulted to using the default IDE. The other trend I want to point out is these cloud-based IDEs are now becoming a really popular thing. So Replit was, and the Mimir IDE were both cloud-based, meaning that the code that you were editing was not on your device. Like when I go in here into Replit and I write code, this file isn't saved anywhere on my computer. This is being saved on some computer up in the cloud, like basically like Google Drive. And then when I use the terminal here to interact with my program, to run it, to do anything I want, this is all happening on a server somewhere in a data center. And this is nice for multiple reasons. Like, we use this at Google and at Facebook because, one, at these big tech companies, there's just too much code. It can't even all fit on one computer, on like your own computer. You need a massive amount of memory because there's just so much code at these big companies. And two, if the computer ever gets stolen, the code doesn't get stolen with it. The code lives in the cloud, and you just get like a window into it from your computer. And so the computer alone doesn't give you access to the code if someone steals your computer. Probably the code that you're writing in this class as a student, no one's going to try to steal your code. But if something happens and you drop your computer in a bathtub or something, you don't lose all your code. It lives in the cloud. So for that, if you want to use VS Code, there's this new thing that Microsoft created called Vscode.dev. So if you go to vscode.dev, it actually runs a full Visual Studio Code like IDE in your browser, which is amazing. And here you can open a local file, which I'll do here, demodir. You can either, oops, there we go. You can either open a remote browser, so like a repository, one of the GitHub repos that you've created, and then all of your code lives in the cloud. Or you can even just open a local directory on your computer where the files are on your computer, but this IDE is actually just running in your browser, which is so handy because then you don't need to install anything. So if I come here, yes, save changes, I can make edits. Hello. And I can also come here and make a new file. So let me try creating a demo.py. Make this a little bigger. You can see this is now providing, highlighting def hello world. Maybe I'll print for I in range num. Go ahead and print hello world. So this will print hello world however many times you pass in. Maybe 10 times. And so now, even though this file is still on your local device, the IDE is running here in the browser and you didn't need to install anything. Very handy. And if you wanted to, you could also run source control. You can open a remote repository, which now means my actual code runs in the cloud.